I decided to purchase a custom-made map of the Truist Park area so I could make a custom gift for a friend. This map will be 11 by 14 inches. This map will be a multi-layered map with a three-dimensional stadium that I will build later. Once I received the custom map from Etsy, I was able to separate it into 4 layers: the ponds, the buildings, the streets, and the highway layers. Once separated, I added building, street, and highway names to make it a bit more interesting. When done, I stack all the layers on top of each other, finishing with the placement of the three-dimensional baseball stadium that I will build later in the project. Now it's time to start building this. So I open up the Mira 7 and I place a 1/8 inch piece of maple plywood onto the laser bed so that I can engrave the first building layer. After doing an autofocus, I send the first building layer to the laser and I frame it. I then close the lid and I hit the start button to begin engraving the buildings. I'm engraving at 300 millimeters per second at 30% power. It's going to take about an hour to engrave this layer. After the building layer is done engraving, the laser starts to score the building names. For the scoring, I have the laser set to 200 millimeters per second at 15% power. These settings give me a nice dark score. The engraved settings for Truist Park were just a bit too low, so I just engraved it twice to make it a bit darker. It had been set for 300 millimeters per second at 30% power. It should have been a little bit higher on the power side. I next send the pond layer to the laser so it can cut out those areas. These cutouts will later be replaced with blue acrylic to represent water. When this cut job was complete, I sent the street layer to the laser. This layer will score the street names and engrave the streets. So let's go ahead and hit start and get this engraved started. The score settings are 200 millimeters per second at 15% power, creating a nice dark score. The engraved settings are 300 millimeters per second at 50% power. During the engrave, I noticed that the engrave was leaving more of a char than I would like, so there are 2 things I wish I would have done: reduce the power setting or had masking on the material from the start. Nonetheless, I convinced myself that the charring gave it a more antique look, so I'll go with that. And finally, I cut out the piece using 10 millimeters per second at 90% power. So I open up the laser lid, give it one quick inspection, and I remove the piece and place it on my workbench. Next, I place a 1/8 inch piece of blue translucent acrylic to cut out the pond areas. I isolate the pond areas and I send them to the laser and I press start. So after the cut is done, I remove each piece from the laser and I take them to the workbench. I place each piece into the cut areas and they fit perfectly into place. I now place a piece of 1/8 inch pre-masked sapelli plywood onto the laser bed. I will now start the highway layer. But first I will score the 2 interstate signs that will be on this layer. I'm doing this to paint colors of the actual interstate signs. So now that they're scored, I will remove the masking and paint the top part red and the bottom part blue. I paint a couple of coats of each color and allow them to dry thoroughly. Once completely dry, I place a small square of masking over each painted area. I then rescore the same area and I remove the excess masking. Masking the paint will protect it from the char marks during the next engrave process. I now load the names of the highways to the laser. I close the lid and I press start. The engraved job immediately starts to engrave the interstate sign that I just painted, and you can see that the charring is falling on the masking rather than the painted areas. Now that the laser is done engraving all the highway names, I open the lid and I remove the piece and I return it to my workbench for painting. I grab some white acrylic paint and a small paintbrush, and I start to push paint into all the engraved areas. Not only did applying masking over the red and blue paint areas protect it from charring, it also allows me to paint the white numbers and letters without painting the top surface. The white paint will pop on the sapelli plywood once the masking is removed, so I'll continue to paint the remaining engraved areas. When done, I'll allow it to dry thoroughly. I'll then place it back into the laser and cut out the second layer highway system. Now that I've sent the highway cut job to the laser, I'll close the door and I'll press start. Now let's sit back and let's just watch the Mira 7 cut this 1/8 inch plywood like butter. The cut settings I use for this job is 10 millimeters per second at 90% power. Your settings may be different than mine. These are just the settings that work for me, my laser, and my material. And just like always, Lucy the laser dog is with me on every project. She loves staying underneath the Mira 7 while the laser is working. And now that the Mira 7 is done with the cut, let me remove the piece and take it to my workbench for unmasking. I start to remove the masking from the piece, and as you can notice, the interstate signs and names really pop on the darker sapelli plywood. I now get the bottom layer and I place it underneath the highway layer. I will now apply Gorilla Glue onto the bottom side of the highway layer. I'll get a brush and I'll smooth out the glue. I now place the highway layer squarely on top of the bottom layer and I press it into place. Finally, I get a piece of MDF and I place it over the piece and I weight it down so that the glue can dry. It's now time to make the stadium, but first I had to create the file first. I found a top-down view of Truist Stadium and I placed it into Adobe Illustrator. I then began to manually line trace the stadium one line at a time. So when done, this is what I came up with. I then separated each layer to make 4 different score and cut jobs. Since I want to add a little color to the field level, I isolate the field and I will just score those areas. Once scored, I will remove the masking and paint those areas with green paint. Once the paint dries, I place the piece back into the laser and I engrave Atlanta Braves onto the field area. I then finish up with scoring the rest of the seats and cut out the first layer. I remove the bottom field layer and take it to my workbench to remove the masking. I use Gorilla Tape to remove the smaller pieces of masking. When done, this is what it looks like. I think it looks pretty good. I now score and cut the remaining 3 stadium layers. When done, I place them all on the workbench and prepare them for glue. I apply a thin layer of glue to the bottom of each layer, and I glue the 4 layers together. When done, I set it aside and allow it to dry. Enough time has passed that the glue is dried on the first and second map level, so I remove the weight. I turn the piece over and I stick small pieces of white acrylic onto the cut areas on the back of the map. Now the pond area pieces can be added to this piece. Using the masking techniques that I used on the interstate sign earlier, I painted a 2-color acrylic plaque that I will adhere to the map with double-sided adhesive. This project is now rounding third and headed for home. I now engrave the frame for this project with a baseball saying. I load the frame into the Mira 7 and I place masking on the bottom of the frame where I will engrave the saying. Since the frame is way thicker than the previous material, I will have to autofocus the laser. Once done, I send the engraved job to the laser, make sure that the framing is correct, and I hit start. It takes only a few minutes for this engraved job to complete. When done, I remove the frame and I take it to my workbench for assembly. So now that the frame has been assembled, it's time to hit a home run and finish this project. Let's grab some Gorilla 2-part epoxy and apply it to the bottom side of the 3D stadium. Now that the glue has been applied, let's go ahead and place the 3D stadium onto the center of the map. Allow plenty of time for the glue to dry thoroughly before moving the piece. Well guys, that's the ball game, and we ended it with a game-winning home run. If you made it this far through the video, Lucy and I really appreciate it. Please take the time to like and subscribe to my channel. I hope I was able to show you a few things that you can use in your next project. So if it happens in my world or the Mira 7, I'll more than likely make a video of it. So until my next project, have a great day and see you soon. Adios.